Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print, media and cinema. Today we are going to talk about displaced people, abandoned homes through examining the different princely states and their stakes, their position during the partition. So, we are going to talk about Hyderabad during partition and then we are going to talk about Assam, and we are going to talk about the case of the Sylheti Bengalis. So, we see that although the princely kingdoms of India maintained self-government inside their own borders, they were also subject to alliances with the British at the time of partition of 1947. So, the British abandoned all agreements with the Indian Independence Act of 1947, which allowed the states to choose full independence. So, their status would also change after the partition. By 1948, nearly all the princely states had acceded, so they had either become part of India or of Pakistan. There were approximately 565 princely states in India when Mir Osman Ali Khan was Nizam of Hyderabad and Mir Laik Ali was his prime minister. The southern state of Hyderabad was the largest with an area of 82,000 square miles. So, in Hyderabad during 1951, the Muslim Nizam reigned over a feudal empire with a majority Hindu population of 18.6 million people approximately. So, Hyderabad was an exceptional chapter in Indian history as it chose independence and planned to keep its wealth and influence by maintaining an irregular army. The Nizam at that time was also afflicted by the Telangana revolt, which he was not being able to quell. Hyderabad and the Dominion of India signed a standstill agreement in November 1947, keeping all prior agreements in place except for the stationing of Indian soldiers in the state. So, we see however that India invades the state of Hyderabad in September 1948 following a crippling economic blockade. There is a fear that by the Indian government that Hyderabad might announce itself as a communist state and there might be rise of the Razakars. So, with all these apprehensions, India invaded Hyderabad. So, the Razakars were a paramilitary group associated with the Majlis-e-Ittihadul Muslimin or Council of United Muslims, and thereby and thereafter the Nizam joined India. He signed accession with India and joined the Dominion of India. So, during this blockade and invasion, massive communal violence had erupted as a result of this operation, and it was frequently carried out by the Indian army, not much of which has been formally officially recorded or it has remained an under discussed chapter in Indian history. The Sundarlal Committee was established by Jawaharlal Nehru And according to the Sundarlal Committee report, which was not released until 2013, the conclusion was that as a very reasonable and modest estimate, the total number of deaths in the state lay somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000. Against this background, we could read a number of artworks that refer to the case of Hyderabad, the situation of Hyderabad during the partition. One such work is Samina Ali's Madras on Rainy Days. It is situated in the late 1980s and 1990s, early 1990s Hyderabad. The protagonist is a 19-year-old Laila, who is a naturalized American citizen and who is born in the Hyderabad city and brought to India from the US to marry a suitor called Samir. So, the story represents an insight into the post-partition lives in Hyderabad. She is narrating about her extended family who live in the Hyderabad city after having been driven away from their ancestral property during partition. So, Laila's maternal grandfather was a Nawab, he was a Nawab. Laila's maternal grandfather was a Nawab, and he loses his feudal estate in Miryalguda in Nalgonda district. He loses his estate in Miryalguda in the Nalgonda district of Hyderabad during the late 1940s. So, the story depicts that the property was seized by his own workers during the Telangana armed struggle, and later on it was appropriated by the Congress government. So, Laila's family basically is narrated, or Laila's family is depicted as living in exile, and it is haunted. The family members are haunted by displacement and a sense of loss. The sense of trauma persists decades after the incident, and it is sharply highlighted, and the pain or the agony reaches its zenith, and it is expressed violently, and it is expressed through it's expressed the pain reaches its zenith, and it is expressed with the gang rape of Laila's cousin Hena during a communal riot in the late 1980s. So, we see that the articulation of trauma or the expression of trauma is heightened with the rape of Laila's cousin during the communal riot. We have the figure of, so we have two characters that are dealing with trauma and with pain in two different ways. One is the figure of Taki Mamu, who is pained, and there is a self-preoccupied loquaciousness, verbosity, and too many words about his displacement and disenfranchisement in the Indian nation, and that is opposed to Nafisa's silence. So, both of them have witnessed the seizure of the estate, but Taki Mamu angrily airs his views whenever he can, whereas Nafisa chooses not to, and this is a stark contrast of two characters, between two characters, that the reader notes, and this silence could also be ascribed to the class difference. So, it also indicates that there is a zone of voluntary silence in personal narratives of partition with respect to the Hyderabad chapter. Not much is talked about this, not many people have researched the topic. So, it has remained an under discussed, under researched terrain vis-a-vis partition scholarship. So, partition is conditioned by exile from the space of identity, a world that ceased to exist, that has been violently erased. So, for Laila's parents' generation and for Uncle Taki or Taki Mamu, partition is understood in terms of an absence, a kind of irreconcilable vacuum. So, we see that for a woman in the diaspora such as Laila, it's a twofold experience of exile. She is at one point, I mean, at one level she lives as an exile in the US away from Hyderabad, and at the other she also cannot return to the Medialgoda of her mother's time, because it physically does not exist anywhere on the world's map. So, it is only something one can reach through psychic travel. So, even if she were to return to Hyderabad permanently, Laila would still psychologically remain in her exile. And we see once again in Anita Desai's novel Clear Light of Day, the characters named Raja. So, in Anita Desai's novel Clear Light of the Day, the character named Raja befriends a Hyderabadi Muslim family, which later flees to Hyderabad from their house in Old Delhi, and Raja later receives a letter from his friend called Hyder Ali, who informs that they are safe in Hyderabad. So, we see that there is a contradiction. Although Hyder Ali's letter says that they are safe and that there is no trouble in Hyderabad, the family is in hiding. So, this contradiction does not resolve. No explanation is given for this dissonance throughout the novel, throughout Desai's novel. So, it is a mistaken idea that I mean many mainstream writings conceived that there is or there has been no trouble in Hyderabad during the partition, during the entire event of partition. So, Desai posits recollection as implicit and indirect, working through her characters' interaction, especially through dialogue and reminiscence, thus building up a concept of history in an indirect and implicit manner. So, such comments are guilty of overlooking how the connection between family's history and partition history do not and cannot account for experiences of the the experiences from the fringes and the silenced groups who faced the worst of partition violence and displacement. So, Hyder Ali's cultural gatherings have a sense of experienced loss in them, and all the settings, the scenes and actions recall the lost culture of Hyder Ali's household, and this memory runs as a subterranean current, as an underlying it runs as a subterranean current of another community's displacement and exile, and so through the evacuees that travel to Hyderabad, through their lost culture, lost era, what the authors are trying to look at, or an author like Desai is trying to say or refer to, is the nation's, an author like Anita Desai is referring to the nation's fractured legacy. So, we see that Hyderabad is not directly mentioned, but the lost culture, the lost customs, are part of this underlying memory, the subterranean memory. It shapes the nation's fragmented, fractured legacy. So, we see in Nilkant's Razakar Nilkant's Razakar is an autobiographical work. It could also be seen as biographical, which is a common feature of many literary narratives associated with partition. So, Nilkant's preface to Razakar begins with references to the gendered violence of partition, and it reproduces the oral testimony of an elderly Punjabi neighbor. The narrator tells him that she witnessed her three young daughters commit suicide in order to escape imminent rape at the hands of other men. So, traumatic memories of partition still linger in the hearts of survivors, and Nilkant confesses writing the book as a way of expressing what his own family has gone through, how his own family was also affected by the partition violence. So, his parents, his paternal uncle and aunt were displaced from their home in Nizamabad district, and they sought refuge in Barshi, which is in present day Maharashtra. And so, they returned after the storm went silent, and they had to resume their lives again. And so, Nilkant writes that his book is based on actual events that took place in Hyderabad. From here on, we are going to move on to our discussion. From here on, we are going to move on to our discussion on the case of Assam. Anindita Dasgupta has an important essay in this regard. She discusses about the Sylheti partition migrants, migrants in the northeastern Indian state of Assam, and there has been a categorical denial of the Sylheti Bhadralok's state of refuginess by themselves, and there is a resistance to being constructed as such in the partition studies. So, there are three overwhelming reasons why the Sylheti populace may not be considered as refugees. Firstly, the Sylheti partition migrants were not victims or sufferers in terms of violent riots if we compare with the West. Second, their lives had straddled two valleys, the Brahmaputra and the Surma region of colonial Assam, and they had lived in these two valleys for generations. Thirdly, the Radcliffe Boundary Commission had retained 4 thanas or districts of the erstwhile Sylhet district in Assam, and therefore, many Sylheti Hindus had become part of India, part of the Indian population or the nation state of India without having to move anywhere. So, they were not refugees in the sense of being victims or sufferers that were driven out of homes, and they do not subscribe to the sense of being or feeling uprooted. So, for most Sylheti Bhadralok, partition refers to, or partition would mean a loss of landed property in Sylhet or the loss of the Deshir Badi, the house back in one's Desh, leaving intact their landed property and job in other areas of Assam which remained within India. So, they lost something, but they also retained other assets. What stood out clearly in these people's narratives was the proposition that they did not have to flee for fear of life. So, they do not see themselves really as the refugees who were rendered the status of passive objects of history, swept away by external determinants beyond their control. Rather, they claim themselves as active agents and participants in the process of decision making which were their own. So, for the Sylheti Bhadralok, there was this shame of being identified as a refugee. Refugee as a term, as I have already discussed, is largely seen as a slur on one's social status, and it reflects badly on one's socioeconomic position. So, So, English educated professionally qualified groups would refrain from calling themselves as refugees. They had requisite educational qualification, and they would never want to be conflated with the refugees, Bengali refugees, whose popular imagination was infesting, crowding the Shialda railway station, sometimes living in the station. And they would proudly claim that they had never lived in camps even for a day. Their fathers had their own houses in places such as Shillong and Dibrugarh. So, the representation of the East Bengali refugees has remained trapped within predictable categories of the Sharanarthi, the ones seeking refuge, the Vastuhara or the homeless, and the Udbastu who are uprooted. None of these images are invested with some kind of agency, they lack agency, and so they have also been looked down upon typically by the West Bengali population, and they are called as Bangals, a term which became synonymous with the refugees. So, these representations of refugees are they do not match with the Sylheti partition migrants. So, the Sylheti optees, they are rather optees than refugees. They opted to stay in India, and these optees, Sylheti optees in Guwahati during 1947-1948 are remembered as coming or wandering around like in the tourist capacity, coming with cameras in their hands, clicking random pictures of the city, and they thought that Assam was a jungle and they were so excited. So, they exoticized Assam basically, they had no idea. For the first and second generation partition migrants in the Brahmaputra and Surma valleys in Assam, no major incident of violence are recorded during or after, no major incidents of violence recorded immediately before, during or after the Sylhet referendum and the partition. So, the prime factor for migration was a psychological pressure that something could happen if they stayed back rather than something that actually happened. So, they were mostly swayed by rumors and stories of atrocities on Hindus that floated in or that came from, that floated in from Punjab, and people, the Sylheti Bengalis also feared that their religion, their culture and self-respect cannot be maintained if they were to live in Pakistan. So, the Sylheti Bhadralok scattered themselves among the local residents, and so they formed certain refugee pockets in Assam and in the surrounding region in Shillong Tura, the Kachar valley, and in Tripura, and as well as in some of the urban localities of the Brahmaputra valley. So, they were able to establish themselves comfortably. They had social networking, they had academic or educational qualifications, so they settled well in and around Assam by the early 1960s. The educated section excelled in business and professions, whereas the small businessmen were successfully, they had successfully gained foothold in various commercial enterprises. Central government sectors such as banks, railways, the office of the accountant general, insurance, post and telegraphs were also manned by these Bengali Hindus in the Assam region. So, this is a map that we can see. The profile of the Sylheti Bhadralok is therefore very different from the stock image of the Bengali refugee or the stereotype emerging from popular imagination and partition scholarship. They were part of the colonial elite in all the Assam districts who had lost their ancestral homes after the Sylhet referendum. However, they were not pauperized, they were not victimized by communal violence. So, with the help of social networking and their qualifications, they were able to re-establish themselves in their land of choice without much difficulty. So, they do not carry the same burden of shame and helplessness, and they try to separate their case from that of the larger situations or situation of refugees as we understand today. Nabanibha Bhattacharya notes that Sylhetis are therefore not a people without a history. These people were rather without a geography, because some of their districts, like I have already mentioned, remained within India. So, this accounts for a lack of narrativization, a lack of research or discussion on Sylhet vis-a-vis partition studies, as Sylhetis were optees and they hardly faced overt violence as compared to the western the western border of India, where Punjabis faced brutal violence and some extreme forms of violence, and the Bengalis followed that kind of experience. That kind of experience was largely shared by the Bengalis. The traumatic experience of persecution and this loss of life and property are not so much observable among the Sylheti Bengalis. And so, the case of Sylheti Bengalis lack resemblance with the larger partition trends, and this has led to their invisibilization from this entire discourse of partition. They do not share a similar backdrop, or similar, they do not come from similar sensibilities like the Punjabis and the Bengalis, so or the Eastern Bengalis. So, Sylhet had this double handicap. They were non-Assamese district in Assam and a Bengali speaking district outside of Bengal. That is what Sylhet was. So, Sylhet had a double handicap. On the one hand, it was a non-Assamese district in Assam, and on the other it was a Bengali speaking district outside of Bengal. So, Sylhet's the Sylhetis plight was addressed neither entirely by Assam nor by Bengal. It was not discussed either within the purview of Bengal or Assam's partition. And so, there is a lack of there is also a lack of translation of literary resources, a lack of translation of scholarly resources on partition on this particular issue. So, we see that officially Sylhet is outside Bengal since 1874, and therefore, Sylhet's position remains compromised in history, and it is treated as part of a local nuance. It is treated as part of local nuances, and it is attached with certain local prefixes. The Sylhet issue is attached with certain local prefixes. It is attached with certain local prefixes, and so Sylhet becomes a third in terms of the partition discourse. Its position is quite marginal, or it on the lower side in terms of the, if we see it in terms of hierarchy. We mainly talk about Punjab, we also talk about Bengal, but people are hardly aware of such cases as the princely state of Hyderabad, and then the case of the Sylheti migrants. And so, the critics and scholars that study in this field recommend engaging with the Sylhet issue by comparing the available official administrative records with the oral sources that can be generated from the people, as a way of examining or cross studying the local national debate. And in this regard, we have to also understand that when we talk of something or a place or a topic in terms of its localized, as in terms of a local issue or as a local issue, local is seen, can also be seen, as Gyanendra Pandey asserts, or as Gyanendra Pandey states, local can be seen as a special entity, and so local can also refer to as the particular or the concrete, and it may not always be pitted against the mainstream. So, local does not always mean it is opposed to, or torn off from, a breakaway from the mainstream. With this, I am going to stop today's lecture today, and thank you so much.